Imagine you're in a room. In front of you is a machine with a series of switches, labeled from slight shock to danger, severe shock. In the next room, you can hear a man you just met. He's strapped to a chair. An expert, a scientist in a lab coat, tells you this is an experiment about memory. Your job is to read word pairs to the man. Every time he gets one wrong, you have to give him an electric shock, increasing the voltage each time. The first few shocks are minor, but then he starts to grunt in pain. At 150 volts, he yells, "Get me out of here! My heart is bothering me!" The scientist looks at you and says calmly, "The experiment requires that you continue. What do? Do you stop? Or do you keep flipping the switches, all the way to the end?" Most of us believe, without a doubt, that we would stop. We would defy the authority. But a psychologist in the 1960s decided to test that assumption, and what he found should shake every one of us to our core. This was the question haunting Stanley Milgram in 1961. Thoughtful, he wanted to understand how the Holocaust could have happened. Were all those involved monsters? Or were they ordinary people caught in an extraordinary system? So he designed an experiment at Yale University. He told participants it was about punishment and learning. There was a teacher, the real subject, and a learner, who was actually an actor. The drawing was rigged so the subject was always the teacher. The final piece was the experimenter, the authority figure in the white lab coat.
Banana, apple, grape, orange, lemon.
Orange.
It's incorrect. Correct answer was grape.
At first, things are simple. 15 volts, 30 volts. The learner grunts, the teacher might laugh nervously. But the tension builds. 120. Ugh, hey, this really hurts. 150 V. Get me out of here, I refuse to go on. This is the first major crisis point. The teacher turns to the experimenter, who responds with one of 4 prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. You can see the subject's internal struggle. They sweat, they tremble, they argue. But most of them continue. 285 volts. 330 volts. The teacher now looks to the experimenter for guidance. The silence is terrifying, but the experimenter states that a lack of response is an incorrect answer, and they must administer the shock. Before he ran the study, Milgram polled his colleagues, psychiatrists at Yale. He asked them what percentage of Americans would go all the way to the final 450-volt switch. They predicted about 1%, only the true, sadistic fringe. So, what was the actual result? In the most famous variation of the study, 65% of participants, 2/3 of ordinary people, obeyed the orders and administered the final massive shock. This is the crucial lesson of Milgram. Those people were not just monsters. They were us. They were uncomfortable. They wanted to stop. But they were trapped in a situation where a legitimate authority told them they had to continue. The power of the situation overrode their own conscience. However, the study's power changes when you change the situation. When the experimenter gave orders by phone, obedience dropped to 21%. When the teacher had to physically press the learner's hand onto a shock plate, it dropped to 30%. And most hopefully, when 2 other teachers, also actors, were in the room and rebelled, 90% of the real subjects joined the rebellion. This shows us that it's not our internal character that's a fixed point, but the context we are in. It teaches the danger of blind obedience, but it also teaches the immense power of defiant role models. The key here is reframing the situation. The obedient subjects saw themselves as a tool, a cog in a scientific experiment. The defiant ones reframed their role. I am the person responsible for this man's pain. Recognizing that you have agency, even when you're being told you don't, is the first step to free thinking. So, would you flip the switch? The uncomfortable answer is, it depends on the room you're in. The Milgram experiment is a humbling, terrifying reminder that our morality is not as stable as we think. But what if the pressure isn't from an authority figure in a lab coat, but from people just like us, our friends, our colleagues? That's the power of conformity, and it's what we'll be exploring in our next episode on the ash lines experiment. If you're finding value in questioning these fundamental assumptions about ourselves, please subscribe and join the conversation in the comments below. What was your biggest takeaway from this study?